Before we begin today, I would like you to pause for just a moment and become curious about something. Not about your work, your relationships, or everything that's happening around you, but about the conversation you have been having with yourself for years. Because sometimes the most influential voice in our lives isn't the one we hear from other people, it's the one that quietly speaks inside us every single day. And today I would like us to gently explore that voice together. Good morning, or perhaps good evening, wherever you are, whether you're driving, walking, making yourself a cup of tea, or lying in bed, unable to guide your thoughts. Hello, and welcome back to From the Therapy Room, Psychology of Mind and Body, understanding how we think, feel, pattern, and become. I'm your host, Jyoti, a clinical counseling psychotherapist. I'm really glad you're here. You're welcome to follow this space and stay connected. This is a space where we gently explore the inner landscape of human mind, where psychology meets lived experiences and where the stories we carry inside finally find language. Like I said earlier, today I want to begin with a question. Not a question that you need to answer for me, a question that I hope you will carry with you throughout this episode. If someone spoke to the people you love the way you speak to yourself, would you accept it? Just pause for a moment. Imagine your closest friend called you and says, I made a mistake today. Would your first response be, of course you did. You always mess up things. Probably not. Imagine your child comes home from school after failing an exam. Would you look at them and say, you're such a disappointment? I don't think you would. Imagine your partner is struggling. Would you tell them, you're weak? Stop being so dramatic. Most of us wouldn't even dream of speaking to someone we love that way. And yet, somewhere between waking up and going to sleep, most of us speak to ourselves in a way that we would never tolerate from another human being. Have you ever noticed how quickly it happens? Sometimes, before you have even gotten out of bed, your eyes open, and before the day has even begun, your mind has already started talking. You should have woken up earlier. Look at you. You have wasted another day. Why can't you be more disciplined? Everyone else seems to manage. Nobody has criticized you. Nobody has rejected you. Nobody has even spoken to you yet, but somehow the conversation has already begun. And what's interesting is we rarely question it. We question other people, we question news, we question social media, we question politicians, but the voice inside our own head, we often treat it as fact. Not because we have examined it, but because we have heard it for so long. Have you ever caught yourself apologizing for something that wasn't really your fault, or replaying a conversation repeatedly, wondering if you said too much or too little? Have you ever received 10 compliments but spent the entire evening thinking about the one criticism? Or maybe someone simply didn't reply to your message. Nothing dramatic happened, no argument, no rejection, just silence. And before long, your mind quietly begin filling the blanks. They're upset with me. I must have done something wrong. Maybe I have annoyed them. This always happens. It's fascinating, isn't it? Life doesn't always tells us these stories. Sometimes our own mind does. And over time, we stop recognizing the difference between what happened and the meaning we have automatically attached to it. I wonder if you have ever had one of those days where nothing particularly terribly happened, but by the end of the day, you felt exhausted, not because of your work or your family, but because of the constant conversation happening inside your own mind, almost as though you have been defending yourself in an invisible courtroom all day. Every decision cross-examined, every mistake presented as evidence, every success dismissed as luck, every weakness recorded permanently. It makes me wonder, who is this voice trying so hard to convince? Because here is something I find deeply moving. When another human being is struggling, something inside us very soften. A friend says, I felt like I have failed, and we instinctively respond, no, you have been through so much. Someone tells us they are overwhelmed, and we don't call them weak. We ask, how can I help? Someone cries in front of us. We don't usually say, pull yourself together. We offer them kindness, presence, patience. So, why is it? Then the compassion we so naturally extend to other people so often disappears when the person suffering is us. Why does empathy travel outward but struggle to find it, its way home? Maybe you have never really thought about it. Maybe you have simply assumed this is just who I am. I have always been hard on myself. That's what keeps me going. If I stopped criticizing myself, I would become lazy. It's a belief many people carry, that self criticism is somehow responsible. That's it's the reason they are successful. That if they become kinder to themselves, they would stop trying. But what if that's not entirely true? What if the harsh voice inside your mind isn't there because you're weak, or because you're broken, or because you secretly enjoy putting yourself down? What if the voice actually had a beginning? What if it wasn't something you were born with, but something you gradually learned? And what if the relationship you have with yourself today isn't simply about personality, but about years of experience, thousands of moments, many so small, no longer consciously remember them, that slowly taught you how to speak to yourself? Today, we are not going to try to silence that voice. We are not going to fight it. We are not going to call it the enemy. Instead, I simply want us to become curious, because sometimes the most powerful question isn't how do I get rid of this voice? Sometimes the most powerful question is, where did it learn to speak this way? And perhaps that's where our journey begins, because none of us arrive in this world hating ourselves. No baby looks into the eyes of people holding them and think, I'm not enough. Those words come later. Those beliefs come later. Those conclusions are learned. So today, let's gently begin tracing the story of that voice, not to blame anyone, not to relieve the past, but simply to understand how something that once may have helped us survive can quietly become the way we relate to ourselves. And perhaps by understanding it, we begin to loosen its grip, because understanding is often where healing quietly begins. As I said earlier, we spoke about the many ways of us speak to ourselves, and perhaps as you're listening, you recognize some of those sentences. I'm not doing enough. I should have known better. Why am I like this? But have you ever wondered something? Where did you learn to speak to yourself like that? Because here's what I find fascinating. Like I said, none of us are born with an inner critic. A baby doesn't look in the mirror and think, I'm not lovable. A toddler doesn't fail while learning to walk and say, I'm such a failure. Children don't naturally interpret mistakes as evidence that something is wrong with them. They learn that interpretation, not in one dramatic moment, but through hundreds, sometimes thousands of ordinary moments. There's an interesting idea in psychology. It suggests that children don't just learn what to think, they learn how to think about themselves. And they learn it through relationships. Think about a young child who learns excitedly to show a drawing. One response might be, tell me about it. Another might be, can't you see I'm busy? Or perhaps, that's nice, but you went outside the line. Neither moment defines a childhood, but children aren't collecting isolated memories. They are collecting patterns because the child's brain is constantly asking questions they don't even know they are asking. When I need someone, what happens? When I make a mistake, what happens? When I'm upset, what happens? Do I feel accepted only when I'm doing well? The answer to these questions slowly become the way they see themselves, not because someone sat them down and explained it, but because children are extraordinary observers. Long before they understand language, they understand emotional tone. They notice facial expression, silence, sigh, warmth, distance, approval, disappointment. Sometimes what shapes us isn't what was said, it's what was repeatedly felt. One of the earliest thinkers in psychology, Sigmund Freud, believed that as children grow, the voice of the important adults in their lives gradually become part of their own inner world. At first, the rules comes from outside. Don't do that. You should know better. Be good. Don't cry. But over time, something remarkably happened. The child no longer needs someone standing beside them saying those things. They begin saying them to themselves. It is as though the outside voice slowly move inside. When those early voices are encouraging, they often become an inner guide. A quiet voice that says you made a mistake, that's okay, let's try again. But when those early messages are filled with criticism, shame, or the feeling that love had to be earned, the inner guide can become an inner judge. Notice the difference. A healthy inner guide says, you made a mistake. The inner judge says, you are the mistake. One talks about behavior and the other talks about identity. And identity is much harder to escape. Have you ever noticed that after one small mistake, your mind doesn't stop there? You send the wrong email, forget someone's birthday, lose your patience, and suddenly your mind isn't talking about about the event anymore. It's talking about you. I'm so careless. I'm impossible to live with. I always ruin things. That's one of the things harsh criticism does. It turns moment into identity. But here is something important. Children don't usually blame the people they depend on, they blame themselves. Imagine being 5 years old. The people you rely for love, protection, and safety seems angry, unavailable, or impossible to please. A child's mind cannot easily conclude the adults around me are struggling. That would feel terrifying. Instead, a child's mind often reaches a different conclusion. It must be me. If I can just be quieter, smarter, better, less emotional, more helpful, then maybe everything will be okay. All the time, that belief can actually help the child survive emotionally. It gives them a sense of control because if I am the problem, maybe I can become the solution. But the difficulty is these children grow up, those beliefs often don't. Years later, you are sitting in a meeting, talking to your partner, raising your own children, or simply trying to get through another day, and the same voice quietly appears, not because it's telling the truth, but because it becomes familiar. And our mind often mistake familiarity for truth. So perhaps the real question isn't why am I so hard on myself? Perhaps the question is whose expectations have I been carrying all these years? Because the voice you have called me may actually be much older than you realize. And if that is true, then another question naturally follows. If this voice didn't begin with me, how much of it actually belongs to me? Let's talk about that. Before the answer, I think I want to ask another question. Have you ever noticed that sometimes your reaction feels much bigger than the situation in front of you? A friend takes longer than usual to reply your message. Your partner says we'll talk later. Your boss writes, can we meet tomorrow? Objectively, nothing terrible has happened, and yet something inside you change. Your chest feels tight. Your thoughts become louder. You begin imagining conversation that haven't happened. You replace yesterday in your mind. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Have I disappointed them? It's almost as though your mind starts preparing for a rejection that hasn't even happened. And then, if everything turns out to be completely fine, you almost feel embarrassed by now how much you worried. Have you ever experienced that? If you have, I want you to hear something very carefully. That reaction doesn't necessarily mean you are overreacting. Sometimes you are not reacting only to what's happening today. You are reacting to what today's moment remind your nervous system of. Our minds remember through stories, but our nervous system remember through feelings. Sometimes you can't explain why someone's silence affects you so deeply. You simply know what it does. Sometimes criticism stays with you for days while someone else lets it go in minute. Sometimes a small disagreement feels strangely overwhelming. Not because you're weak, but because your body has learned to associate certain experience experiences with emotional danger. Think about a child who never knew which version of parents was coming home. Some days there was warmth, other days there was tension. Nothing was predictable. The child brains become incredibly good at noticing tiny changes. A different tone of voice, a facial expression, a sigh, the sound of footstep. It isn't because the child is anxious by nature, it's because paying attention helped them feel prepared. Years later, the child becomes an adult, but the habit of scanning doesn't simply disappear. Now they read deeply into text messages. They notice the slightest change in someone's mood. They immediately assume they have done something wrong. Other people call them too sensitive. Perhaps they have become highly trained observers. The problem is what once helped them survive now leave them exhausted. And here is something else that often happens. Many people become incredibly skilled at looking about everyone else's emotions. They know when someone is upset before anyone else notices. They know how to calm people down, how to avoid conflict, how to keep peace. From the outside, they seem thoughtful, generous, easy to be around, but inside, they're constantly asking, is everyone okay? Because somewhere along the way, keeping other people emotionally comfortable begin to feel connected to staying emotionally safe. Sometimes people call this being a people pleaser, but I wonder if that description misses something important. What if many people pleasing other isn't about wanting to be liked, but if it's about wanting to avoid losing connection? I mean, those are very different things. Have you ever noticed that? And maybe that's why it is so difficult to stop, because you're not just changing a habit, you're challenging something your nervous system once believed was necessary. There is another beautiful way of understanding it. As children, our earliest relationships slowly become the blueprint for how we expect relationship to work. If comfort was available when we were hurting, we often learn people can be safe. If our feelings were welcomed, we often learn it's okay to need someone. But if comfort was unpredictable, if love sometimes felt conditional, if we had to work hard to earn approval, those experiences quietly become expectations. Not because we choose them, but because they are familiar. And here's the difficult part: as adults, we often expect from ourselves what we once experienced from others. If mistakes were met with criticism, we criticize ourselves. If emotions were dismissed, we dismiss our own emotions. If we felt we had to be perfect to stay connected, we continue demanding perfection from ourselves long after nobody else is asking for it. I mean, I wonder, do you wonder? Just see, it's as though the relationships, we once lived in, eventually became the relationship we have with ourselves. We bring us back to the question we started with, why it is easier to be kind to other people than to ourselves. Maybe because somewhere inside you, you're still trying to earn the kindness you so freely give away. Maybe a part of you quietly believes, when I finally get everything right, then I'll deserve the same understanding I offer everyone else. But here's what I want you to gently consider. What if kindness was never supposed to be rewarded for getting everything right? What if it was meant to be very thing that helps us find our way when life goes wrong? Because if compassion is something you believe only comes after perfection, you'll spend your whole life chasing something that was never meant to be earned. But even when we begin to understand where these patterns come from, another question remains. Why is it that one compliment disappears in minutes while one criticism away stays with us for years? Why does our mind keeps returning to the same painful conclusion? By now you might be thinking, if these beliefs began so many years ago, why haven't they disappeared? After all, you're not the child anymore. Your life has changed. You have met new people. You have success. You have survived things you once thought you never would. So, why does that familiar voice still return? The answer has less to do with intelligence and much more to do with the way human mind works. Our brains are extraordinary. Every single day, they receive more information than they could ever consciously process. So they do something incredibly efficient. They create shortcuts, patterns, little mental maps that help us make sense of the world. Imagine walking through a forest every day. The first time you have to push through branches and find your way. But after walking the same path hundred of times, a trail appears. Eventually, you don't even think about which direction to go. Your feet already know. Our mind work in the similar way. The thoughts we think repeatedly become easier to think again. Not because they are true, but because they are familiar. If somewhere early in life you begin believing I'm not enough, your mind quietly begin collecting evidence to support that belief. Not because it's trying to hurt you, but because the brain prefers consistency. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to dismiss compliments? Someone tells you, you did a wonderful job, and almost immediately you think, they're just being nice. They don't really know me. Anyone could have done it. Now imagine someone criticizes you. Maybe not even harshly. Maybe they simply say, I think you could have handled that differently. Suddenly, that one comment will stay with you all day. You replay it while driving home, while making dinner, while trying to fall asleep. Why? Not because criticism is stronger than praise, but because criticism fits the story your mind already knows. It's like trying to put two puzzles pieced together. If the piece matches the picture you have been carrying for years, your brain accepts it almost instantly. But if someone offers you a piece that doesn't fit, you're capable, you're lovable, you did well, your mind hesitates. It turns it over, question it. Sometimes it rejects it altogether. Isn't that interesting? The mind isn't always asking, is this true? Very often it's asking, is this familiar? And familiarity can be incredibly convincing. That is why two people can experience exactly the same situation and walk away with completely different conclusions. One person makes a mistake and thinks, well, everyone makes mistake. Another make the same mistake and thinks, this proof I'm not good enough. The event is identical, the meaning is completely different, and if you're being carrying the same meaning for years, your brain starts seeing it everywhere. You forgot one appointment, see, you're hopeless. Someone doesn't call back, see, people always leave. You need help, see, you're a burden. Notice what keeps happening. Are you noticing those things? Have you ever experienced something like this? What I'm saying? Every new experience is being interrupted through an old story. The story came first, the evidence come later. Sometimes I ask people to imagine wearing a pair of glasses with tiny scratches on one lens. After a while, you stop noticing the scratch. Instead, it begins to look as though the whole world has changed. You assume what outside you is blurry when in fact is the lens you have been looking through. A belief can work in much the same way. When the lens says I'm not enough, life starts look like constant confirmation. Not because life is constantly proving it, but because the mind is quietly filtering what it notices. And here's something that I think is deeply compassionate. Your brain isn't trying to make you miserable, it's trying to make the world predictable. Predictability feels safe, even when it's painful, because the unknown has always carried a certain amount of risk. So if you have spent years expecting criticism, oddly enough, praise can feel uncomfortable. If you have spent years expecting rejection, healthy relationship may even feel unfamiliar at first. Not because you don't want love, but because your mind doesn't quite know what to do with something it hasn't practiced. This is why healing often feels strange before it feels natural. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because you're walking through a part of forest where there isn't yet a path. You're choosing a new thought, a new response, a new way of relating to yourself. And at first, it feels awkward, not because it falls, but because it's new. So the next time that familiar voice says, see, this just proves you have changed, perhaps you can pause for a moment and gently ask yourself, is this the truth? Or is it simply the oldest story my mind knows how to tell? Sometimes the one question creates enough space for something new to begin. But there is something else I have come to appreciate over the years. The critical voice inside us isn't only voice we have. If we listen carefully, you'll notice there are different parts of you having different conversations. One part criticize, another part feels hurt, another parts keep trying harder. And understanding those different parts change everything. I would like you to try something for a moment. The next time you notice yourself being self critical, don't immediately argue with the voice. Don't try to silence it. Instead, become curious. Ask yourself, who inside me is speaking right now? At first, that question might sound a little strange because we tend to think of ourselves as one person, one mind, one voice. But if you have ever found yourself thinking, part of me wants to go, but another part wants me to stay, or part of me knows I'll be okay, but another part is terrified, then you have already experienced something important. We are rarely just one voice, we are made up of different parts of ourselves. Think about your own life. Perhaps there is a part of you that is always trying to get everything right. It makes lists, double check things, feel guilty for resting, believes that if it is just tries a little harder, everything will finally be okay. Then there is another part that once feel exhausted, the one who that wants someone to say you don't have to carry everything all alone anymore. Maybe there is a part of you that avoid conflicts at all costs. It apologizes quickly, keeps the peace, swallows disappointment, not because it has nothing to say, but because somewhere conflict stopped feeling safe. And then there is the critique, the one we have been talking about throughout this episode, the voice that says, that wasn't good enough. You should have done better. Don't get your hopes up. Don't trust people too easily. For a long time, we assume that this voice is our enemy. But what if we became curious instead of defensive? What if we ask, what is this part afraid would happen if it stopped criticizing me? Sit with that question for a moment. Maybe the answer is, if I stop pushing you, you'll become lazy. Or if I don't point out your mistakes first, someone else will, and it will hurt even more. Or perhaps I'm trying to stop you from being rejected again. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. Many of the parts we dislike the most were created during times when we needed protection. They simply haven't realized that life has changed. Imagine a smoke alarm. Its job is to protect the house, but imagine it's being so sensitive that if it went off every time someone made toast. You wouldn't say the smoke alarm is evil. You would say it's trying too hard to keep you safe. Sometimes our inner critique is a little like that. It isn't trying to ruin our life, it's trying to prevent pain. The problem is, it can't always tell the difference between the past and the present. So it reacts as though every mistake is catastrophe, every disagreement is abandonment, every risk is danger, and every imperfection is something that must be corrected immediately. When you see it in this way, something shifts. You stop asking what's wrong with me and you begin asking what happened that made this part believe it had to work so hard. That question changes the relationship completely because curiosity creates a space where shame cannot easily survive. And here is something I have noticed: the people who are hardest on themselves are often very people who have spent years protecting everyone else. They are reliable one, they are responsible one, the one everyone leans on, the one who rarely asks for help. Not because they don't need support, but because somewhere they learned, if I am the one holding everything together, maybe everything will stay okay. The critic often work alongside that responsible part. Together they whisper, don't let your guard down. Keep going. Don't disappoint anyone. Don't be too much. Don't need too much. And after years of hearing those messages, you forget they're only parts of you. You begin believing they are all of you, but they aren't. The part that criticizes you is real. The part that worries is real. The part that wants approval is also real. But so is the part that longs for rest, the part that wants to laugh without guilt, the part that wants to make mistake without believing it has failed a person, the part that simply wants to feel accepted without constantly proving its worth. Perhaps the part has been very quiet, not because it's disappeared, but because the critic has been speaking over it for a very long time. Maybe healing isn't about getting rid of critique. Maybe it is it's about finally allowing the quieter parts of you to have a voice as well. Because every part of you has a story, but not every part should be allowed to write the ending. Brings us to another question. If we have spent so much of our lives trying to earn love, approval, and acceptance, when did we begin believing that our worth had to be earned in the first place? I would like to leave psychology for a few moments and ask you something much simpler. When did you begin believing that your worth has to be earned? not your success, not your achievements, your worth. I hope I'm making sense. It's such an ordinary belief that many of us never question it. We say things like, once I lose weight, I'll feel better about myself. Once I get promoted, maybe I'll finally feel good enough. Once I'm a better parent, a better partner, more disciplined, less emotional, more successful, then then I'll deserve to be proud of myself. Then I'll deserve to rest. Then I'll deserve kindness. But have you noticed something? That then keeps moving. You achieve one goal, and almost immediately your mind creates another. You finish one mountain only to discover another waiting behind it. It's as though your mind keeps whispering, not yet, not enough. Keep, keep proving yourself. And perhaps the saddest part is this: many people spend their entire life chasing a finish line that doesn't exist. Because if your worth depends on becoming enough, how will you ever know when you have arrived? Sometimes I wonder whether we have quietly confused two different things: being valuable and being productive. Think about how often someone asks, "How are you?" and we answer by describing how busy we have been, almost as if busyness has become evidence that our life matters. We celebrate exhaustion. We admire people who never stop. We apologize for resting. And without realizing it, we slowly begin measuring ourselves by what we produce rather than by who we are. But imagine holding a newborn baby. No one asks, "What has this child achieved?" No one says, "Let's see whether they're worthy of love." The baby hasn't accomplished anything, hasn't earned anything, hasn't proven anything, yet we instinctively know they deserve care, gentleness, protection, not because they have done something remarkable, but simply because they're human. So, somewhere along the way, something changes. We stop believing that being human is enough, and we begin believing we have to justify our existence. Sometimes through success, sometimes through perfection, sometimes through always being needed, sometimes through never making mistakes. And the more we chase worth, the further away it seems to become. Perhaps that's because worth was never something we were supposed to chase. Perhaps it was something we gradually forgot. There's another thought I would like to leave with you. Many of us have become incredibly compassionate towards other people's imperfection. If a friend loses their job, you don't conclude they are failure. If someone you love is grieving, you don't think they are weak. If your child is struggling, you don't stop loving them until they get everything right. You continue loving them while they struggle. So, why do we create different rules for ourselves? Why does your humanity make someone else deserving of compassion, but your own humanity become evidence that you're falling short? Maybe because somewhere inside you have been living by the rule that was never consciously chosen. I'm lovable when filling the blanks. When I'm successful, when I'm useful, when I don't upset anyone, when I make everyone proud, when I never need too much. Those little sentences quietly shape entire lives. Because if love feels conditional, the lives become a constant audition. You're always trying to prove that you deserve a place, a relationship, a compliment, a moment of peace. But here is something I want you to consider. What if a person you're trying hardest to convince isn't other people? What if it's yourself? It's yourself. What if you haven't spent years trying to earn your own acceptance without realizing that every new achievement only raised the standard a little higher? And perhaps that's why so many successful people still feel like imposters, because external success cannot silence an internal belief that says I'm still enough. Only questioning that belief can become to loosen its hold. Maybe worth isn't something that grow every time you achieve more. Maybe worth has been there all along, hidden beneath years of fear, comparison, expectation, and impossible standards. Perhaps healing isn't about becoming worthy. Perhaps it's about slowly letting go of the belief that you were ever unworthy to begin with. And that leads somehow another thing in my mind. If the voice in our mind isn't the whole truth about who we are, then who are we beneath that voice? And what happens when we stop believing every sentence it's a speak? As if we came to for today's episode, I would like to ask one final kind of question for just for today, not for otherwise. Not as a psychologist, not as a therapist, simply as one human being is speaking to another. If that critical voice becomes silent just for one day, who do you think you would be? Would you stop caring? Would you stop growing? Would you become lazy? Or would you finally exhale? It's interesting how many of us believe that our inner critique is the reason we have survived, that without it, we would lose our ambition, our discipline, our sense of responsibility. But let me ask you this. Have you ever seen a flower bloom because someone shouted at it? Have you ever watched a child learn because they were constantly humiliated? Have you ever felt truly safe with someone who only pointed out your flaws? Probably not. Growth doesn't usually happen when fear is greatest. Growth happens when there is enough safety to try, to fail, to learn, and to begin again. Perhaps that's true within us too. Perhaps the voice that has been driving you all these years has helped you survive. Perhaps it kept you alert, prepared, responsible, independent. Maybe it protected you when you genuinely needed protection. If that's true, then it deserves to be understood, not hated. But here's the gentle truth: what protects us at one stage of life can sometimes imprison us in another. A child who learns to stay quiet to avoid conflict may become an adult who struggles to express their needs. A child who believes perfection keeps relationships safe may become an adult who never feels good enough. A child who learns not to burden others may become an adult who carries pain in silence. The strategy made sense then. The question is, does it still serve you now? Maybe this is what healing really asks of us, not how do I become a different person, but what can I thank for helping me survive and gently outgrow because I no longer need it in the same way. There's something deeply human about that. Because healing isn't rejecting your past, it's recognizing that you don't have to keep living by yesterday rules. And maybe, just maybe, the goal isn't to get rid of your inner critique, because if you have lived with it for years, it probably won't disappear overnight. Perhaps the goal is something much quieter. Than next time that voice says you're not enough, you notice is, instead of automatically believing it, the next time it says you're going to disappoint everyone, you pause and ask, is that what's happening right now? Or is that an old fear speaking? The next time it tells you you have to earn your right to rest, you become curious enough to ask, who taught me that? Not to blame, not to fight, simply to understand. Because awareness changes our relationship with the voice, and when the relationship changes, the voice slowly begins to lose the authority it once had. You may still hear it, but you no longer have to obey it. I think that's one of the most freeing realization in psychology, as something, a thought is not a command, an emotion is not a prediction, and an old belief is not a life sentence. There's always a little space between what your mind says and what you choose to believe. Sometimes that space is tiny, sometimes it lasts only a few seconds, but over time those few seconds become moments. Those moments become choices, and those choices slowly become a different way of living. Not because you have become someone new, but because you have stopped living an older story define who you are. So before an end, I would like to return to the question we began with. If someone spoke to the people you love the way you speak to yourself, would you accept it? If the answer is no, perhaps don't ask yourself to become kinder overnight. This isn't how real change usually happens. Instead, the next time you notice that familiar voice, simply notice it, listen to it, become curious about it, and then remind yourself this may be a very familiar voice, but familiarity is not the same as truth. Maybe the sentence alone is enough to carry with you today. And perhaps the relationship that needs your kindness the most is it isn't the one that's falling apart around you. It's the one you have been having with yourself every single day. So, this has been from the therapy room, psychology of mind and body. And if you find these conversations meaningful, if this conversation felt like that it was speaking to you directly, if something has resonated with you, don't rush to move on. Sit with it, journal about it, talk to someone you trust. Notice what emotions surfaced while you were listening. Please share this episode with someone who might quietly need it, because so many people live inside this pattern silently. And if you enjoy psychologically deep, therapy room style conversation around healing, relationship, trauma, anxiety, attachment, and emotional well being, follow the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Be gentle with yourself, not because you have earned it, but because you're human. And maybe that has always been enough. Until next time I'll be just sitting next beside to you. Take care.